Welcome to the Reinvention Code. I'm your host, Dorinda Walker. Reinvention isn't random, it has a code. On this podcast, we'll explore what it really takes to navigate life's transitions with introspection, faith, and strategy. If you're evolving, rebuilding, or stepping into a new season, you're not just starting over, you're leveling up. Let's decode your next chapter together. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode. My guest today has spent more than 4 decades helping shape music, culture, and entertainment. He's the author of the acclaimed book, The Show Must Go On, and long before hip-hop became a global force, he was one of the people helping move the culture forward. Master G of the Sugar Hill Gang has credited him as someone who helped carry hip-hop across the bridge from New York into New Jersey during its earliest days. Over the years, he signed artists including DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Salt-N-Pepa, and Kid and Play, among many others. He's worked with legends like Prince, Chaka Khan, Teena Marie, and Grandmaster Flash. He built his own talent agency and today serves as the general manager of the Lehman Performing Arts Center in the Bronx. But what makes his story so compelling isn't just the success. It's the reinvention, the setbacks, the losses, the moments he had to start over, the personal tragedies that tested everything he believed about himself and his future. Today, we're talking about the man behind the accomplishments, the lessons learned from a life spent in the room where history was made, and what it takes to keep rebuilding when life doesn't go according to plan. Please join me in welcoming Mark Green.
Thank you so much, Dorinda. I appreciate you having me.
And well, you know what? You were referred by my former guest, Renita Bryant, and she spoke so highly of you. So I'm so excited to have you here so we can talk about life's journey and all the things that made you the man that you are today. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So let's get right to it. Before the agency, the labels, all the work accolades, who was Mark Green as a kid? And how does a boy from New Jersey end up becoming the person who helped carry hip hop across the globe?
I had a passion for music. I met a young man named Freddie Williams, who was my neighbor. I was taking drum lessons. He was taking guitar lessons. We hooked up and we decided to form a band. The band was called Black Pearl. And we just began to do a lot of gigs around the neighborhood. There were cocktail sips, there were weddings, there were just evening events. And during that time, when I eventually went to his house, I saw all these gold albums on his wall, and I was like, wow, what is that? And I looked closer, and they said the Jackson 5, ABC, I Want You Back, Stop the Love You Saved. And he told me, well, my uncle wrote and produced those songs for the Jacksons. I said, what, are you kidding me? He says, yeah. So right then and there, he became my best friend. We had our band, I guess, from the 8th grade to the 10th grade. By the 10th grade, the funk era started to fade away and the disco era started coming in. And by that time, my band, we just pretty much disbanded as a band. I had all the equipment because we used to practice at my house. So I'm sitting home one day and I decided to hook up my turntable to the big speakers. And the sound was amazing. So I went out and got another turntable. And before you knew it, I just started practicing DJing. And I started DJing here and there. And then my first gig was at the high school. I think it was an event during the summer. And after that event, everybody was blown away. They started calling me to do the parties, the football parties, and, graduation parties. And eventually word got in the streets and a guy, a promoter, I don't remember who he was, or I think I was in Inglewood, New Jersey at the time, and he asked me, would like to be a part of the Battle of the DJs in the Bronx. So I said, of course. So that particular night, I'm thinking this was probably around the end of 76, going into 1977. I went over to the Bronx and there was 3 crews, myself and 2 other people. So I got on the turntables first. I'm DJing, I'm mixing. And before you know it, another crew started. And I had probably about 50 people around me at the time. And by the time the other crew started, I probably had about 12. So I hurry up and close my set because I wanted to see what's going on over there. Why did everybody run over there? So I pack up my set and I go over there and I see two guys on the mic. And the next thing I know, I hear them guys talking and they doing this kind of rhythm rhyme thing. I was like, wow, that sounds so hot. And the next thing I know, the other crew started. It was four guys and they're doing the same thing. So I immediately ran home that night. I don't even think I even went to sleep that night. I went home, I wrote my first rap. And that following weekend, I had a party in the Hackensack Projects and I did my rap and I just became ghetto famous overnight. Everybody came running to me. What is that you're doing? Sing that song again. Let me hear that poem. And one of the guys that was very intrigued about what I was doing was his name was Guy O'Brien. And Guy and I were, good friends in high school. He was a freshman. I was a junior. I mean, he kept coming to me, Mark, what is that? I said, it's rapping. That's what they're doing in New York. And at that time, I was the only person really doing it in the neighborhood. So that following fall, I went to college and by then had created his own crew and he started rapping. And by 1977, that's when they had the blackout in New York. And I think everybody and their mother stole equipment and broke into stores. And everybody, by the time I got to college, everybody was DJing. So Guy calls me up and he says, hey, man, we're getting ready to make a record. I said, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, we're going to make a record off of Good Times. Now, Good Times was the hottest record at the time between 77 and 78. I said, really? He said, yeah. So next thing I know, probably in the 77 or 78, or maybe it was 79, he said, the record is coming out. It's called Rapper's Delight. And when I heard the record, I was so jealous. I ain't gonna lie. I was envy. I was mad because I was in college. I was studying music. And here he is becoming a star, something that I wanted to be. So, I talked to my parents. They didn't want me to drop out of college. And I continued DJing while I was in school. And later on, I came home and was talking to Guy and he told me about Sugar Hill Records and I went there and applied to get me a job as an intern. And that was the beginning and probably the first time I ever heard rapping. And I would like to say, as he said, I was an influencer, in the beginning of hip hop, because he made the first rap record on record and became the biggest rap record selling of all times, Rapper's Delight.
That's awesome. So you know what? I'm a Jersey native. So what part of Jersey are you from?
Hackensack.
Born and raised in East Orange. So I lived right around the corner from Whitney Houston growing up. She lived on Dye Street and our family lived on Cottage Place. So tell me about your introduction into, hip hop. You signed DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Salt-N-Pepa, like all legends.
Sure.
And you did that in your first year as an agent. So you were also on the road with Eddie Murphy. You built a distribution company for Prince, right? You worked with Chaka Khan. Like you just worked with so many legends. So what does that actually feel like to be that close to greatness? And what did those artists teach you about yourself?
I mean, you got to realize that I grew up watching certain artists on TV and to be able to be around these artists and be a part of their livelihood or be able to assist them in their career, it was just mind blowing for me. I remember the first time I worked with Eddie Murphy and I was just like, I was starstruck, because he was so big at the time. He had just finished doing Delirious and Trading Places. So when I was working with him, he just came out with Beverly Hills Cop, and that was like the biggest movie at that time. And I remember just walking into the stores with my laminate, and everybody wanted to give me everything for free. And I was like, wow, what is this all about? And it was just, I mean, I had met so many people on his tour, everybody from Sean Penn to Willie Nelson to Stevie Wonder. And just being around him it was great. But the problem also was that there was people that always wanted to kind of block you. They didn't want you to get too close to them. So I just played my position and just kind of hung out when I was able to hang out.
I remember the first time I fell in love with hip hop. My mother was a aspiring singer. She used to take me to the studio in New York. And someone had a big beatbox and we were on 42nd Street and they played Rapper's Delight. And it changed the game. It like changed the span of music and culture. And it was just a great time to be in. Cause I remember like my mom, when I used to come home from school, we used to dance to like White Cherry, play that funky music, White Boy, like the funk era, like I said. And then it just, I feel like hip hop just came and it just took over.
It did.
And
But
yeah, music was never the same. And I think it was for the good, of course, because it was it's a global culture right now. But for you to be part of something so special and so monumental and how it changed culture and how it created millionaires and billionaires, especially in the art community, what did it feel like to be part of something that you didn't know was going to be so great and take off the way it did?
well, you know what it was? It's like it was like a game to us. You know, it's like playing the dozens, jump scotch or whatever, you know. It was just something that you did for fun. We never thought it was going to be a situation where we become more monumental or that you were able to make money in terms of what this genre has actually done for people. It was just something we just did for fun. It was all about bragging and boasting about who you were and what you could do. There was no gangster rap. It was all about fun. So we didn't know that at the time that we were doing it, that we were actually creating something that was going to be as big as it is now.
Wow. So you went from an intern, right, to a roadie, to an agent, and you did all the unglamorous work, right? What did that experience teach you that a corner office never could have?
You know, my passion was music. I didn't care what I did or how I did it. I just wanted to be a part. So first, you know, my idea was to become an engineer. I was able to convince Mr. Robinson at Sugar Hill Records to let me come in and work as an intern. I stayed in the studios. I was there during the time they were making some of the bigger records like The Message and when Sequence finally came from North South Carolina. And I was just there during the time that, you know, even the Sugar Hill Gang when they were making the other records for their albums. So that was my first desire. After I got out of college, and while I was in college, as a DJ, I started promoting shows. And during this time, I met Phyllis Hyman and Melba Moore. And I told them my passion, what I wanted to do. And they saw it, and they both of them gave me their phone numbers and said, well, Mark, when you get out of college, just call me. So my first person I called was Melba Moore. And, you know, she invited me over to, which was now called Hush Productions. And, you know, I saw an opportunity to become a drummer for a guy named Lilo Thomas because I was a drummer. And I thought I was great till I really came back to New York and realized I didn't have the talent that I thought I had. And when I tried out as a drummer, I didn't get the job. They said, well, listen, Mark, you know what? You could be a roadie. I didn't know what a roadie was, but they was like, basically, you're going to set up all equipment on the stage. Being a musician, knowing how to play piano, knowing how to play the drums and sax and all that, I was able to just start my career there as a roadie. From that point on, you know, I started looking to focusing on more what I wanted to do, which was really become a part of this whole record business. But during that actual time as a roadie, we got an opportunity as the group Lilo Thomas to be the opening act for Eddie Murphy. And that was the first time I ever worked with a real celebrity, and I was starstruck.
So one of the reasons why I started the Reinvention Code was to help people go through transition and transformation, right? And you've been fired, you've been pushed out, you had to start over more than once, right, in your career. Was there ever a moment where you genuinely didn't know if you were going to make it? Not just professionally, but personally.
Yeah, there's quite a few times. You know, I always felt like knowledge was king. Anything that I could learn about the business, I read trades, I read magazines, watch movies, TV, anything that I could learn to give me knowledge of this business, I wanted to, you know, swallow up and just take in. But then there were times where, as I got more into the business, that I realized the competitiveness of this whole business, and not only being on top of your game, but the people that were also trying to be where you were. So there had been moments where I think the first time I got fired from a job, getting back into the position or getting back into the game was like musical chairs. It's like once you lose that seat, it's hard to get back in. So you almost had to wait till the game started all over again. And each time that that happened to me, I had to reinvent myself. And how did I do that? Well, I studied everything. Like I didn't just go in and say, hey, you know, I want to be promotion person. I wanted to know what marketing did. I wanted to know what sales did. And I studied those crafts as well. So each time that I did lose a position, I was able to kind of reinvent myself because I knew how to do something else, or I did it, as a part of just doing it for free, so to speak.
Yeah, one of my reinvention codes is your title is your container, right? But your talent is your currency because you can take your talent anywhere and
Yeah.
repurpose it and rebuild. So thank you for sharing that. On my podcast and in my book, I've been very open about my parents' issues with drug abuse. And a lot of people in this industry use the pace and the access as a cover to excuse drug abuse. And you've been open about, going through your own bout with drugs and what was really underneath it and what finally made you choose yourself. Can you share that experience with us?
Sure. I always tell people, I came up in the early 80s. I call it the Scarface era because that was the first time we really kind of discovered cocaine. I mean, I had early on, I guess in high school, had dipped and dabbed it with reefer, but I was more of an athlete, and I limit, that time of like smoking weed. It would be like a person going out to a bar and only having a drink, but not really drinking it. You just did it socially. That's how weed was for me. But it wasn't until I guess after I got out of college that a gentleman introduced me to cocaine. And after that one hit, it just changed my life. It hindered me from a lot of situations, a lot of positions, because cocaine was so, uh, when I say that it is an addiction, it's probably the worst addiction I ever experienced. And at the time, it just took control of your life. I think it wasn't until, there was several times that I had stopped and started and stopped because, you realize that, oh man, I didn't get that job probably because I didn't sleep the night before. I was high or something. So you realize early on that the effect of it, but again, when you're addicted, when that addiction kicks in, it doesn't matter. So it took me a long time to really get the monkey off my back, so to speak. But I had to learn from the trials and tribulations of what the effect was and really understand how it was affecting me before I could really change my life.
Because both my parents struggled with heroin addiction, and my mom was addicted to crack during the crack era. And she was able to kick the crack habit. But what she told me was crack was unlike any other drug that she used because she was constantly chasing that high. So I commend you for being able to, battle that addiction and get through it because not a lot of people have the fortitude or the courage to face that demon. But let's switch gears a moment because you built a public life and a private one, and the private
Mm.
one had some serious storms, right? So when we talked initially, you told me you were being stalked while dating, and that's a specific kind of violation, and that doesn't get talked about enough, especially for men, right? So what did that stalking experience do to how you trusted people?
Well, I talk about it in my book, and I have like 12 rules or 10 rules in my book. And the first rule is don't trust anyone. And I say that because, during that time, I had just got divorced. I guess it had been a year or two, and I was kind of still heartbroken from my divorce, but I knew that I needed to really go out and kind of try to meet people. I had gained a lot of weight. I was going bald, and I just wasn't feeling myself. So finally, after a couple holidays that passed by, I think it was 4th of July and Memorial Day, I decided, well, I got to get out here and try to figure out and start dating again. Because you got to realize I was married for probably, I think, 8 years or so, and I really didn't know how to date anymore. So I went online to this online dating site called Black Planet, and I began my whole dating process. I think I dated online probably about for 3 years before I eventually met my wife. But during that process, I met all kinds of people. And the funny thing about dating, and I always say I can write a whole book about dating, was that not only did I learn about who I really was, but I learned about women and what they really want. Because, as a man, we always think we could conquer. We know we this, we that, we the man, but you really don't know what women really like. So it was like, imagine just going on interviews like 3 or 4 times a week, just interviewing women. And eventually I got the feel of, you know, okay, I can do this. And every now and then I felt somebody I felt comfortable with. So the first person I think that it happened to me was I felt comfortable with this girl enough to just disclose a lot of information about myself. And later on, she used that information against me. I mean, to the point where she spread stuff about me that I told her to my job, and everybody's looking at me, Mark, do you know who that person is who sent this email? And I was like, oh my God. Eventually, I had to go to court because this woman started stalking me. She started creating different profiles as I was dating, trying to trick me. She was coming up here looking for me. Finally, after the situation happened with my job, I went to court and I knew everybody in court because I was, running a theater in New Jersey. And they was like, Mark, listen, you probably don't want all this to be exposed. He said, but what we can do is we can make it hard on her. We'll make her come up here 2 or 3 times because she lived in Philadelphia at the time. And eventually put a restraining order on her because she was really out to wreck my life. And come to find out she had 3 different identities. She wasn't who she said she was. And she was just crazy.
Well, I can totally relate to that. So I haven't dated since the late 80s. I lost my husband of 33 years in 2022.
Okay.
And so I tried the dating apps last summer and I realized that they were not for me. I felt like I was interviewing for a position versus just trying to get to know somebody, and everybody wasn't honest or authentic on those apps. So I had on a Christian dating app, I had the person who, when we finally got to the phone call, said him and his wife were looking for a partner. Like, I've experienced so much stuff. And unfortunately, I've also been stalked twice. So I totally can relate to your experience with being, stalked and having to go through the legal system and, all the rigmarole that comes with that. And it could be a scary, scary experience. But as we fast forward, I'm happy that you found your person, right? And you were able to remarry. But then you found that cancer entered into the picture. So tell us about that experience and what does that kind of test reveal about your relationship, right? Because you're dealing with something really serious, and about who you are when everything feels really fragile.
I started dating, I switched dating apps and went to Match.com, and finally I met this young lady who I really felt comfortable with. Unfortunately, she didn't speak a lot of English. She was Latina. And, it was a challenge for me to really communicate with her. But I felt something about her that I just knew that she was the one at the time. We had dated 2 years before we actually got married, but during the dating process, the year before we got married, my daughter had died in a car accident. It was very devastating to me, and it really kind of affected my dating process at the time. I was really kind of gun shy about getting married because I didn't have a job at the time also. And I remember telling my father, I said, listen, he said, so what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, Dad. I said, I don't know if I can get married. He says, what are you talking about? You have a great woman. Why wouldn't you want to marry? Say, I don't have a job. He says, doesn't matter. He says, what does that mean? He says, suppose you get married next month and you lose your job. It's the same thing. If you got a good woman, you need to stick with her. And he says, if you have any problems or issues, we'll be here to help you out, but don't let her go. And, I took his word for what it was, but then I started doing my research, and then I decided to just put it in God's hands, and I just prayed on it. So eventually we got married, and I think 2 months after we got married, she was diagnosed with cancer. Now here I am. I don't have a job. My daughter just passed, and I get married to a woman who just had cancer. So now I'm devastated. I'm mad with God because I felt like I put my trust in him, and I'm thinking he's going to change my life. And now I got to, I'm looking at this situation like my first bill I got was $20,000. And I'm like, my insurance didn't cover it, and I was going crazy. I switched insurance to Obamacare, and then one day this girl told me about charity care, and I didn't know what the heck charity care was. And she said, you should apply for charity care. And at the same time, I had a good friend of mine. He said, listen, Mark, it's not too late. You only been married 2 months. You still can get an annulment. Well, that just really turned my stomach that he even said that, because I couldn't fathom that in the back of my mind. I felt like God would just come down and just put all kind of issues in my life. I said, I took this oath, for better and for worse. And I just, I felt obligated to be there through thick and thin. That whole process really taught me about perseverance. And I already knew about perseverance, but this really kind of gave me the real feeling of what I had to do. Again, I had no job. I began doing, small jobs here and there. I had a house, so I ended up renting two of my rooms out because I needed to pay my rent. I needed to make sure I could sustain my life in some kind of way. So I just kept praying, and eventually, God changed everything in my life, even with the cancer and everything else. Everything just turned around. And, to God be the glory.
Amen.
Yes.
So I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your daughter, and I want to ask you about her, not about the loss, but about her, who she was, and how you still carry her with you every day.
Yeah. So my daughter's name was Janae, and early when Janae was born, I would say probably by her first or second year, I just noticed that she was just kind of a little bit more smarter than I would think the average person was. And I just remember one time we were riding down the street. I don't know if she was 2 or 3. She was like, Dad, how you spell McDonald's? And no, she said, how you spell Mick? And I said, M-I-C-K. And she said, how you spell Donald? And and then we had just rolled past McDonald's, and it just clicked in my mind. I said, huh? Because I'm looking at her like, how did you know that word, As she got older, she became accepted in the gifted and talented school. You had to apply, and you had to actually be accepted. And I noticed that she had that gift of everything. She not only had the gift of words, but she was an artist as well. And her art was just mind blowing. She could draw a picture, and it would look exactly like the picture that she was trying to draw. She also had a musical talent like myself. And then she also had the entrepreneur, because she started her online services, Christmas cards and gift cards and jewelry. And before I knew it, by the time she got to 8th grade, she was speaking fluent Spanish. And I was like, I just got to ask you a question. Like, how did you learn how to speak Spanish like that? Now, me, myself, when I was in high school, I had a opportunity to receive a scholarship in Spanish because I just like the whole nationality, the just trying to learn another language. But I blew my opportunity for my scholarship. And so when she just came there out of nowhere and just speaking it fluently, I was like, oh my goodness. I said, well, how did you learn? She said, Dad, you remember when I asked you for that CD of Sierra in Spanish? I said, yes. She said, well, that's how I started. I listened to all the words in Spanish from that CD, and then I started watching the novellas. And because I would come in the room and she had the Spanish speaking TV's channel, and I'm like, do you understand what they're saying? And she's like, no. So by the time she got to 9th grade, she was fluent in Spanish. Yeah, so she was just a very talented young lady.
How old was she when she passed?
24.
Wow.
Yes.
So something we have in common. My daughter's name is Janae.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't know that about your daughter, but I'm sure you still carry her with you every day. And I
Yeah.
know it's like an unimaginable loss. So thank you for sharing that part of your life with us. So who is Mark Green when nobody's watching?
So Mark Green is a fun guy. He likes to enjoy life. He likes to laugh. He loves sport, loves music, and he loves to work. I'm a workaholic. I had lunch with one of my friends. She says, Mark, you remind me of that episode with the Whiny Brothers when the Jamaican guy said, how many jobs you got, man? You only got 3 jobs. You're lazy. I got 6 jobs, man. How many jobs? She says, because you always want to work all the time. Because I was telling her, I'm retired now, but I think I need 2 more jobs. And she's like, see, I told you. So Mark is that guy. He enjoys working. He enjoys what he does. And for the most part, anything that has to do with music and entertainment, that's my passion.
So I have to ask, is there anything that you fear? And what is it that you feel like you still want that you haven't accomplished yet?
Well, I fear God. And I've been through some things that I talk about in my book where I got stabbed a couple times and I was paralyzed from my waist down when I was 12. I broke several bones in different fights and stuff. And so I had an experience, early in life with certain things that just was totally devastating, especially being paralyzed. And I guess, going forward, I mean, I've accomplished pretty much everything I wanted to do. And right now I'm kind of coasting. I'm doing things that I enjoy doing. And I'm doing it not because of the money, not because of I have to, it's because it's just the passion that I have. So for me, it's just at this point in my life, I'm just happy. I wrote my first book, my memoir, which, it was just, I hadn't planned on doing one, but people would see some of the pictures that I post with some of the celebrities I work with, and I would always post little stories or little paragraphs about picture or what happened or how the picture came about. And people would always say, you ought to write a book, you ought to write a book. So finally, I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and write this book, and I'm going to tell my story. And that's how I came with the book called The Show Must Go On.
Awesome. So we're both authors. Tell me what that process was like writing a book. Because I know for me, I never thought about sharing my story because I carried shame with my story, being a high school
Mm.
dropout, having drug addicted parents. Even though I had achieved success from society standards in terms of having a big title and a career and everything I had accomplished, when I decided to write the book, I knew that it was aligned to what God wanted me to do. Just the way it happened, I got my book deal in 5 weeks. Took me 5 weeks to write
Wow.
the book, and it was published. I was in all the major airports and international distribution, and I made over six figures from selling the book. But tell me what that process was like for you, because a lot of people, particularly, when they're in that midlife stage, think about writing a book and sometimes they procrastinate because they think it's too hard or they don't understand the process. So tell me about how that came about for you.
Well, once I decided I was going to write this book, I had to have a reason and a purpose. And I wanted to share with the world not only what it was like to work with all the celebrities, but I wanted to share the experience of the ins and outs, the negatives, the positives, but more so, I wanted to show how God changed my life from all the things that I had been through. I didn't know anything about writing a book. So a friend of mine, she used to write a lot of ghetto novels, as I call them, and I used to always buy them from her. So when I thought about writing my book, a couple people approached me, but the girl's name is Erica Williams, and Erica she had that background from me. So she had that street edge, but she was able to articulate the same words that I wanted to articulate in my book. So she co-wrote the book with me. And during this process, I wanted to show people that it's not all about the celebrities, but look at what happened and this is how it was resolved. And at the end of the day, I wanted to show how God changed my life. Once all these things happened to me, we talking guns, drugs, and there were times where I've been around murders and stuff. And I wanted to really show that once I made that decision to change my life and give my life to Christ, that my whole life change. And you'll see in the book the process of things that happen between the drugs and hanging out with the wrong people and dealing with these crazy artists that I've dealt with. I talk about the stories of things that happen. But at the end, when I lost my job, I was really at the bottom. And I always say this, and this is, for the people who, read the book, you cannot really deny menial jobs, because when I look at my life, there was times when I did these menial jobs. Here I was a vice president, a general manager, but I don't have no work, so I'm out here in the middle of the street putting up posters on buildings, and I'm working at the MetLife Stadium flipping hamburgers after being a vice president. But I had a passion, and my passion was I wanted to be back in the business. I didn't want to lose my house. I didn't want to lose my car. And I had to do what I had to do. I couldn't worry about what John and Sally was saying about me because, I had to continue to live my life. So I say that to people that read this book, don't allow other people to define who you are because of what you're going through. You are who you are. You have to believe in yourself, have passion for what you do, and really just concentrate on where you want to go at that point. And that was for me. I knew that I wanted to get back in this business. I had to do what I had to do, and it didn't matter what people thought about me.
I tell my children all the time, the greatest freedom you can give yourself is to stop managing other people's opinions about you. So I can totally relate to that. And you rebuilt yourself more times than most people attempt once, right?
Yes.
So what's the code underneath all of it? The thing that you tell someone standing in the rubble of their own life, wondering if there's still a next chapter.
Well, I tell everyone, first find your passion. You have to find your true passion of what you want. Because when you find that passion, it doesn't matter. You'll do whatever you want to fulfill that feeling. And that was me. There were times where I had to take, the next road, or I had to take a different route to get where I wanted to go. There was a time when I taught high school and I didn't hated teaching, but I knew that I needed the job and I needed to really, get back into what I wanted to do, but this was just going to be a stepping stone. So I tell people, listen, don't deny menial jobs, find your passion and continue just to grow. Whatever your passion is, continue to study, learn, don't stop, there's going to be roadblocks. There's going to be situations that's going to put a halt in your life. But if you just continue to stay focused and just continue with your desires and passions, you're going to make it.
So before we close, Mark, first of all, thank you for being a guest. I'm really honored that you would take the time to be on my podcast. Where can people find your book and where can people follow you?
They can find my book at Barnes and Nobles and the audio. You can find it on markmoneygreen.com, or you can go to Amazon and you can pick it up there. You can also follow me at Celebrity Talent Agency Inc. at Instagram and also on Facebook.
Awesome. And is there anything else you want people to know about something you're working on or something you have coming down the road?
Well, right now my company has not only grown from music, but now we started dealing with a lot of actors. I've been working with all the actors I ever grew up dreaming of watching them on TV. There's Pam Grier, Richard Roundtree, Luke Gossett when he was alive. Now I'm getting ready to work with Delroy Lindo. I did Taye Diggs, Wendell Pierce, Vivica Fox, Morris Chestnut, Anthony Anderson, Shamar Moore. I mean, I can go on. And these are people that I watched on TV. And I think for me, I guess the thing that gives me joy is knowing that I'm able to contribute something to their lives, whether I'm making money for them or sharing my experience or getting advice or giving advice. And that has been my new passion right now. So again, just stick to your passion, stick to your desires, and everything will work out for you.
Well, thank you, Mark. You are the epitome of transition, transformation, and rediscovering yourself. So I want to thank you. And to my listeners, as always, if there's something about this episode that touched you, please share, like, and follow, and be sure to comment. Until the next episode, stay blessed, and I wish you much joy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Reinvention Code. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who's stepping into their next season. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Remember, reinvention isn't random. It has a code. I'll see you next time.